Excuse me, do you know how to get to this hotel? Another confused person who couldn't answer us. Person after person either didn't understand what we were asking or answered us in a language we couldn't decipher. We flagged down a taxi and showed him the address. Amsterdam, he told us. Yes, sir, Amsterdam. Can you take us? We were exhausted and at this point had been asking people while towing our suitcases behind us for nearly an hour. Amsterdam, he said again, and when we just looked at him confused, he drove off. We started asking every person we passed until finally, blessedly, we found a man who spoke broken English. Sir, do you know how to get to this hotel? I pointed emphatically at the address on my now wrinkled and dirty paper. He looked at the paper, then back at us, then at the paper again. Yes, it's Amsterdam. Yes, we know. I pointed to the streets around me. Which direction? How do we get there? It's Amsterdam, he said again. I wanted to scream or cry, and he must have sensed my growing distress because he stiltedly fought his way through his response. Hotel is Amsterdam. You are here. Horror started to dawn on me. Where is here? I asked him. He shook his head. Not Amsterdam. You guys, we weren't even in the right city. We were still 2 hours away from it. Likely, we were supposed to get on another train to take us there, but we didn't know. We were sheep. We followed the crowd. What was supposed to be a 2-hour flight ended up being an entire day of planes, trains, and automobiles, and we didn't get to the hotel until it was too late to do anything. I'm sure God was trying to keep me from ingesting illicit baked goods on foreign soil, but the point is still the same. The first step toward achieving your goal is to know where you're headed. The problem is that often people think that's all they need to know. They forget one crucial piece of the puzzle. A map only works if you know both your end and your starting point. Said another way, you cannot get to where you want to go if you don't know where you are. You need a roadmap. You need a starting point. You need a finish line. You need to know the guideposts and mile markers along the way. You need a plan of attack. You can talk about the things you want for your life every single day. I'm sure you can even find friends who will go to coffee with you and daydream and brainstorm, but none of that matters if you don't actually develop a real plan to get where you want to be. People don't get lost because they're not sure where they want to go. People get lost because they start out on a path and don't keep checking to make sure they're still headed in the right direction. How often do you set out on a road trip without a map or directions? The only time we do that is if we don't care where we end up. We just want to take a drive and listen to music and see what we find. But if we actually have somewhere we want to be, if we actually have a destination in mind, we always have a map. Why? Because a map can get us there faster and more efficiently. Because when we see something from a 10,000-foot view, we're able to plan for and anticipate things that might pop up along the way. It's much harder to have any kind of real strategy when you're on the road. I have used this roadmap strategy for every major work project or personal goal I've taken on over the last 15 years. It's how I landed all my major clients in the event industry. It's how I booked press for myself without a publicist and used that exposure to propel my career. It's how I trained for a 10K, then a half marathon, and finally a full marathon. It's how I wrote my first book and got my first book deal. It's the strategy and intention behind everything in my life, from products to relationships. And I'm convinced there isn't anything it couldn't work for. It's not complicated. It only has 3 components. The trick is to approach these elements out of the usual order we expect them to be in. See, we're taught to start at 1, then get to 2, then end up at 3. This is incredibly confusing if you don't know what step 2 is. And how are you supposed to know what the steps are if you've never taken them before? I found that if I flip the order and start with the finish line, then contemplate where I'm starting from, I can more easily define the steps in the middle that will take me from one place to another. Here's how I do it. The finish line. First of all, you've got to start at the end. Counterintuitive, perhaps, but super effective in figuring out what direction your path should go. By now, we've done enough work together that you should already have one clear and defining objective. One goal you're focused on right now. That's where you start. To give you an idea of exactly how I've used this roadmap strategy, I'm going to share a personal goal of mine from the past. I wanted to have a cookbook. I was a food blogger at the time, and having a cookbook felt like the ultimate goal. That was my finish line. I figured out my very specific what by zeroing in on my very specific why. I wanted a product for my fans that would commemorate my family recipes and be a first product offering that was in line with my brand at the time. The starting point. Now that you know where you want to go, you need to practice some self-awareness and be really honest about where you're starting from. What assets, resources, and habits do you currently have that are going to help you with your journey? How can you expand on them and use them for exponential growth? What habits do you have that might derail or push you off course? How can you be intentional in planning around those in advance so they don't sneak up on you? What good habits could you develop to replace those negative ones? My starting place for my cookbook was great. As a food blogger, I knew photographers and designers and a food stylist to help me make it all look incredible. What I didn't have was a literary agent or experience in the cookbook space. I was super honest with myself about what I did and didn't have access to, and then I got to work. The guideposts plus mile markers. Now that you know where you're going and you know where you're starting, the next step is a brainstorm of every single thing you can think of that might help you get closer to the goal. And a great brainstorm always starts with great questions. For instance, how could I get a cookbook deal? At the time, I had no idea, so I headed over to Google. I swear to you, the answer for literally everything exists on the internet for free, and I asked that exact question.